Hi everyone, thanks for tuning into Nodes of Design. In this episode, we have a special guest with us. Hi Andy, welcome back to Nodes of Design. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It feels like only yesterday that I was on the podcast, but I think it was maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago.
Yes, Andy. So, how was your day so far, Andy?
It's been really nice, thank you. I will probably get into this in the talk, but I do two things in my day-to-day job. So I work as a VC, and I also work as a design leadership coach. And so this morning I had a few design leadership coaching clients that I've been helping navigate through some of the challenges of the role. So that's been really fun. I've got another leadership coaching call this afternoon, but in the middle of it, I get to speak to you.
That's really wonderful, Andy. So, if you could give a brief about yourself to our viewers out there.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I don't know how far back you want me to go, but I started off on the web as a Flash designer and developer. I discovered web standards in the early days, back in the kind of early noughties. I wrote one of the very first books on CSS design. So I initially had quite a sort of a following amongst sort of front end developers. I started a agency called Clearleft in 2005, and it turned out we were actually the first UX agency in the UK. So if your audience have heard of companies like Adaptive Path or Happy Cog, we were like the sort of European equivalent. And so my agency became one of the sort of, arguably one of the best known boutique agencies in the world. We won lots of Best Agency of the Year awards. We were listed in the Wired, like top 100 people sort of in the tech space in Europe. And I ran that agency for about 15 years. Um, I sold the agency about 4 or 5 years ago and decided to do two things. So the first thing I decided to do was to do some coaching, as I mentioned before, design leaders, heads, directors, and VPs of design. A lot of that came from my experience working in an agency space. And actually, one of the things I did in my agency is I founded a series of conferences. One of the conferences was called Leading Design, which is all about design leadership. And so when I left Clear Left, I had a lot of design leaders reach out to me, say, "Handy, can I grab some time? I've got some challenges at work." And I've basically found that there's like half a dozen or a dozen common problems that design leaders face. And so I help people navigate through those challenges. And so I do that 2 days a week. But one of the problems I found with the design coaching is that most of the people I coach are at companies where the founders not only don't really value design, but have built a big company without the need for design. And so if you join a kind of later stage company whereby the founders don't see design as a route to market or a route to growth, it can be a little bit of a competition. It can be a tussle. And so a lot of my work with my design coaching clients is helping them raise the profile of design, raise the impact of design, so they can get more um, space to operate. But I kind of realized, well, what could I do maybe to avoid that problem happening in the first place? What could I do that I could kind of actually maybe help those founders in the first few years of their business to make them appreciate design from day one rather than, year five? And so I thought, well, what if I joined the world of venture investing? And so I started working at a really, really well-known European venture fund. It's called CCAP. CCAP are probably one of the top three early stage, pre-seed and seed stage funds in Europe. Got a really, really amazing history. We've got a portfolio of 10 or 11 kind of unicorn companies, companies that have over $1 billion valuation. And so we're really well regarded. And so for 2 days a week, I help founders in the early stages of their journey um, find product market fit, get their product launched, get customers using it, iterating towards, PMF. And what I'm hoping to do is if I can expose the value of design to founders from day one, when they hire their first designer, their second designer, their third designer, when they hire a big design team, there's no friction there because they've already seen the value design can bring. And so the design leaders don't have to fight for a seat at the table. Like they're brought in and given a seat at the table, hopefully, maybe not day one, but maybe year one. So that's why, weirdly, a lot of people might think that being a VC and being a design coach might be very, very different. But ultimately, I'm trying to solve the same problem, but from different angles, top down and bottom up.
Thank you so much, Andy. So, Andy, what inspired you to move from design background into the world of venture capital?
Well, as I mentioned sort of in the introduction, I really want to get companies to access the value of design from as early as possible. And I think being a VC allows me to have influence in the earlier stages of products creation. And actually, I actually think that in the early stages of a product, design can have the biggest impact. When a product is already operating, when you're mostly just releasing new features and perfecting features, the impact you can have is a little bit more constrained. But when you join a startup, like really in the early stages, before anything has been built, while the concepting phase is going on, that kind of 0 to 1 phase that we talk about, you have much more of an ability to shape the product. I think designers are brilliant in startups because we have a good understanding of user needs. We're good at doing, research, or, product people like to call it discovery. And so we can go out, we can understand the problems that people are facing. We can um, ask the right questions, and we can use that to kind of shape our vision of what the product should be. I think a lot of the time founders are really focused on features. They're focused on adding more value to a product. And look, you want a product to have value. So, I'm not going to sit here and say that features aren't useful. But a lot of the time, the reason people use the product isn't just because of this existence of features. It's because people can access the value those features deliver in a really nice way. People are fed up of using their own platform because it's old fashioned, it's clunky, it's difficult to use, there's a lot of friction, it maybe wasn't designed particularly well. People are much more likely to switch to a new platform because the user experience is better. So they need to have those features there, but it's not just the existence of features, it's how those features are structured, often as part of a workflow. I think a lot of the reason that people switch to a product is because their current workflow is inefficient, or their own workflow doesn't necessarily fit with the grain of how their product works. So they have to jump through all these hoops. And so if you're a designer, you can understand the customer's workflow. You can understand their preferences for how they want to flow through a system, interaction design, basically. And then use that interaction design to create a really smooth, seamless experience. And I think, we in the startup world, we talk a lot about kind of creating a 10x product. And I think a big part of that creation of a 10x product, 10 times better than the competition, is through user experience design. In fact, I often say that user experience designers play a major role in the discovery of product market fit. We're at a real kind of important kind of sort of connection point there. And so I want to see more founders think about design, not just as visuals, not just as products that look pretty, but products that really solve a user need and solve it in a way that really gels for them. And so getting designers that seat at the table from day one is massively important. And so that's one of the reasons why I chose to be in VC. Also, I have to say, it's just a lot of fun. I when I was in the agency world, like I loved all of our clients, but we would work with very, very large organizations that make, airlines, major, gas and telecoms companies, banks. All of these companies are quite sort of established. They've got, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of users, millions of customers. And so there's a conservatism, an understandable conservatism there. If you want to try something new and it fails, you might lose lots and lots of money and make lots of customers unhappy. One of the great things about being in the early stages is most of these startups have very few customers, which means that you could be more experimental. It can means you can take a little bit more risk. It means you can kind of play and explore new paradigms. And so a lot of the founders I meet at this early stage are really excitable. They've got lots of enthusiasm, they've got lots of momentum, they want to try new things. And frankly, it's really fun working with founders at this stage. And it can be a real challenge working at slightly more conservative, risk averse companies. And so I love that 0 to 1 phase. I think this is also where designers excel, particularly UX designers. I think these days a lot of designers are focused on just like making things marginally better, which is fine. You've got a design system, you've got an existing product, and you're inching it forward. But I love that 0 to 1 phase where you're inventing things from scratch, brand new things that never existed before. That's the stuff that I think UX designers are especially good at. And so that's why I love working in that sort of stage.
Thank you so much, Andy. So, how has your experience as a designer influenced your approach in evaluating startups and making those investment decisions as a VC?
Um, I think it's been really helpful. I mean, I would say that, but um, as you probably know, there are kind of sort of three sort of modes of thinking. You've got deductive, inductive, and abductive. Deductive thinking is sort of logic. And I tend to find a lot of engineers and a lot of engineering founders think very logic. They're focused on features, they're focused on delivery, they're focused on building a product that makes sense to them. Because if it makes sense to them, they assume it will make sense to everybody. Um, I see a lot of VCs who are also very analytical. They're looking at a product almost like an engineering puzzle. You then get sort of, so that's the deductive stuff. You get inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is much more kind of stats. It's much more um, looking at trends. And I think a lot of VCs are also quite trend driven as well. What's happening in the market this year? 3 years ago it might have been crypto. Now it's AI. And so there's a tendency to kind of follow trends, which is necessary because that's often that's where the big breakout successes are. But I think the thing that tends to be missing in a lot of companies and a lot of VC funds is this abductive reasoning, this ability to sort of bathe in a problem, to sort of look at the kind of connections between ideas and to make these sort of big leaps of insight. Abductive reasoning is the mode if you ever see a TV show, like a detective TV show, where the detective kind of sticks things up on a wall and sits back and like their cogs are turning and they make some kind of great leap of insight. And for me, I think, um, most investment decisions aren't gonna come from logic, because if they are, every company would be investing or every VC would be investing in that company. And they're probably not gonna come from stats and data similarly, because every company, every VC will be investing in that company. I think where breakout successes come in the VC space is through these kind of weird, slightly unusual connections that it takes a sort of a special kind of sort of brain to see. And I think I'm quite good at kind of joining the dots. I think particularly when it comes to understanding user behavior. I'm really good at understanding pain points. I'm really good at understanding needs. I'm really good at understanding frustrations. And I can often see product improvements that maybe some other VCs might not think are big, because on paper they didn't look big, but from a qualitative experience, like they are massive. Um, you know, we didn't invest in Airbnb, but I think I would like to have thought that like seeing Airbnb for the first time, a lot of VCs would have discounted it because hey, like, how are you ever going to take on the big hotels and fire safety and yada yada yada? Who's going to want to stay in a spare room? But if you've ever sofa surfed, if you've ever, kind of, backpacked or whatever, if you have an understanding that being in somebody's world, that emotive human connection, that is a big part of the story of Airbnb. And so I feel like my emotive, humanist sort of research view would be much more likely to kind of bubble up those, less logical kind of insights.
That's wonderful, Andy. So, you have identified seven key factors that affect the growth. So, could you please walk us through them and share how they play, a major role in building a successful product?
Absolutely. Well, you're alluding to my new book. So I've got a new book out, which is called The Growth Equation, which is there. The book came out about a month or 6 weeks ago, and it's very much aimed at startup founders. It's very much aimed at people who maybe have not run a business before or not run a startup before. They may be in the first sort of 2 or 3 years of the company, and they're having to grow the business. Growth is everything in an early stage startup. It's how you convince investors to invest in your next round of funding. Like if you don't have any users or don't have much users, it's really difficult to get that next round of funding that you need to build out your product. And if you have strong growth, then it's much easier. And so from a VC's perspective, a lot of the time I spend with my founders is helping them solve those growth problems, helping them get to that next milestone, helping them raise that next round of funding so they can hire more designers and more engineers and build a bigger surface area. And through these conversations, as you said, I've identified sort of seven factors which I find are have a big effect on growth. It's actually the name of the book. I'm calling the seven factors the growth equation. Now, There are other factors at play. There's probably thousands of factors that affect a company's growth. And I'm not saying these 7 are the only ones out there. But whenever I end up talking to a startup founder, it's usually one of these 7 is at the core. Like, I see these 7 almost like the core SI units. There's tons and tons of SI units around the world, but there are 7 kind of core ones that a lot of the rest of the SI units are kind of built on. And so the first one is pretty, and also I just say, like, this is the first chapter in the book, and I don't wanna spend too much time going over it, but the first big one is audience. You need to have a big audience. A lot of companies I meet, they're building product, they launch an amazing product, but they don't have enough people coming to use the product. And so learning as a founder to build an audience, to find the right audience, to identify who your ICP is gonna be, your ideal customer profile, is huge, because you can have the best product in the world, but if you don't have enough people discovering it, then, you're not gonna get the growth you need. So audience, growth and size is massively important. Of course, it doesn't really matter if you've got a massive audience if they're the wrong audience or if they're not motivated. So part of your marketing ability is to tell stories that motivate your audience. Maybe they've got a problem they didn't realize they had, and you've got to tell the story around why that is actually a bigger problem. Maybe they understood that they've got a problem, but they're not, it's put to the sort of the bottom of the to-do list. You need to raise that problem up in their mind so that it's big enough that they feel that they need to kind of solve it. And so motivation actually is a draw. It is like a magnet that attracts your audience to your product, to your solution, and also attracts them through the process of signing up. Because signing up is a pain in the ass. You've got to pick a new account, you've got to fill in a new bunch of form fields. Maybe when you get to, through the sign up process, uh, it might take, hours or days or even weeks to get all the details in there. You need to start getting value. And so in that little gap between people becoming aware of your product and getting value, motivation's the thing that kind of draws people along and kind of hooks them there. Once they're there, you need to deliver value. So the next argument is value over time. The quicker you can deliver value, the quicker you can keep people, the quicker you can grow. And it's not just about delivering value once, it's delivering value consistently. So, if you have a product that only gets used and delivers value once a month or once every couple of months, people aren't going to stick around. They're not going to build it into their workflow. Whereas if you have a product like Slack where people use it, 3, 4, 5 times a day, you're delivering small amounts of value over time. And that's a big thing that designers can do, UX people, figuring out not only the features that deliver value, but how you can help users through better usability and interaction design to get more and more and more of that value. The purpose of delivering value is to create new behaviors. You know, if you are switching from a current solution to a new solution, until you've embedded that behavior, until that new solution is your default solution, there's a real good chance that something might throw you off. You might go on holiday and come back and go back to your old ways of doing things. There might be a deadline, you go back to your old ways of doing things. And so you need to build stickiness. So that's the next one, the stickiness of your product that kind of keeps people coming back and coming back. Um, Stickiness is also related to something that's called the K factor, which is the virality. The more viral your product can be, the more your product will actually acquire new customers. And so figuring out how you could build in viral growth loops. A lot of the book is around looking at kind of growth loops and funnels and how you as a design or product team or founder can build these sort of growth loops into your products to not only have people coming back for more, but to share the value your product delivers with other people. Um, and then the last two elements are kind of negative elements. The first one is friction. Again, this is something we all know as designers. A lot of companies, a lot of products are full of friction. They're difficult to use. The language is confusing. There's loads of speed bumps. And if you can remove the friction of onboarding, the friction of accessing value, the friction involved in the day-to-day use, then people will stick around for longer. They get more value, they stay. And the last one is obviously competition. All of this stuff doesn't matter if your competitors are doing a better job, if your competitor's product is delivering more value, if your competitors have a bigger audience, if your competitors are doing all the things in the growth equation that you should be doing. And so competition is a massive factor that can either bring you users if you are out competing your competitors, or it could drain users if the people just can't see the difference or don't see the value in using your product versus somebody else's. And so these are all of the arguments. Like I say, this is literally the first chapter in the book. And actually, if your audience want to kind of read that chapter, if you go to the growthequation.info, you can download the first three chapters for free. But the real bulk of the book is like, so what? You figured out what the problem is. How do you fix it? And the book is really looking at all the steps that a founder can take or a designer can take to help nudge growth up, to help remove the friction, to help deliver more value, to help build the audience in a way that you see solid growth until you can get to a point it becomes self-sustaining.
Thank you so much, Andy, for sharing these 7 key factors. So, wanted to understand if a designer is turning himself into a founder, how could he solve this challenge of hiring the first product person or hiring a first engineer to set up for a success for his company?
Yep. I I think a lot of founders mistakenly believe that the product is everything, the idea is everything. And all they need to do is they need to go and pitch a brilliant idea, and an investor will go, love the idea, I'm going to give you money. However, the reality is a lot of investors will have seen those ideas before. You know, I'm regularly seeing ideas that people think are unique, but I saw them a year ago, I saw them 2 years ago, and I'll probably see them in a year or two's time. And so a lot of the job of an investor isn't just identifying a good idea, but identifying whether this is the team that are going to succeed and whether now is the right time for that success to happen. Because if I choose not to invest, maybe a better team will come along. Or if I choose not to invest, maybe in a year's time, a lot of the technical issues have been worked out, or there's more awareness in the market. And so I think the timing and the team are much more important probably than the idea. Because actually a lot of the time, um, ideas change. You know, startups pivot, but what doesn't change is the team. And so I think having a really strong team is important. I think if you are a designer or a product leader and you have a really good feel for product, then that's brilliant. You'll probably need a CTO, and finding a good CTO is massive. I think ideally it would be somebody that you've worked with before, and so the risk of you having an argument and breaking up is minimized. You know, VCs have seen a lot of newly formed leadership teams that just don't get on, and that can ultimately destroy a really potentially amazing company. So having maybe somebody you've worked with, maybe your current CTO or maybe your current you know, engineering manager who you've worked with for the last couple of years would be a good person to pick. Um, I think also having somebody that is good at sales. This is the real kind of unfortunate, dirty secret of startups is you can build the best product in the world. But as I said before, if you don't have the right audience and those audience aren't motivated, um, you're you're never going to get enough people to test the product out to raise that next round of funding. So having somebody in your team that has previous sort of sales and marketing success is really good. Often this will be the CEO. Like if you're CPO, you've got a CTO, maybe bring somebody on board who is a business person, who is has prior experience growing teams, has prior experience selling to people. Because getting your first 10, 100, 1,000 customers is really tough. And this whole chapter's in the book around getting your first customers, doing founder-led sales, founder-led marketing, because these are all the things that product people tend to be poor at. And so you either got to learn that stuff really quickly or find somebody that already knows those skills.
Thank you so much, Andy. So, in your book, you have mentioned that many people get the product led growth wrong. So, what are some of the biggest misconceptions and how should teams approach PLG to avoid these mistakes?
Yeah. So look, I love product-led growth. I think product-led growth is amazing. I think it's one of the biggest trends we've seen in the last sort of 3, 4, 5 years when it comes to startups. And also, I think product-led growth is a thing that um, designers can really have an input on. You know, what is product-led growth? Product growth is making the best product possible. What does that mean? It's figuring out the value your product delivers and making sure that customers can access that value quickly. It's all the things in the growth equation. So these are all things that designers are really good at doing. However, product-led growth in its purest form is using your product as an acquisition channel. The idea is that you can build a product that is so good at what it does that it brings in users naturally. You create in growth loops, you create usage loops, which means that people keep coming back, and you create acquisition loops, which allows you to attract new users. The problem is that this only really works after you've reached product market fit. Product market fit being the sort of point where you've really nailed the product, that you've got a group of an audience of people, that want the problem that want to solve the problem that your product solves, understand the value your product delivers, and have signed up and are using it and getting that value. And once you've got product market fit, then you've got hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of users. You can use those users to get more users. The classic example of product market, sort of product led growth, is companies like Figma. You know, we think Figma is a design tool, but actually they've got more people who are probably engineers and product managers and executives who have got accounts than designers. Designers are the ones that are using the tool, but they invite 5 or 10 of their collaborators to give feedback, to leave notes, to leave messages, to kind of do walkthroughs. And suddenly that becomes an acquisition loop. But your designers wouldn't send those invites out if your product didn't work. You know, you're not going to get that acquisition loop going until you found product market fit. And so, to answer your question, the big challenge that people make, or the big mistake that people make, is they try and use a product-led growth approach on day one when the product isn't there. They're not having users anyway. And this is the kind of irony. Like, how are you going to use existing users to get new users if you don't have any existing users? If you've already got 10 or 50 or 100 people using your product, and 10% of those people invite somebody to join every month, that's really slow growth. Whereas if you've got a really good product and you've got 1 million users and 10% invite new people every month or more, then suddenly the numbers start to make sense. And so I think in the early stages, you have to have a more traditional sales and marketing led approach. You do sales and marketing early, you get those first 10, 100,000 users in, you start iterating towards product market fit. And when you've landed a product market fit, that's when PLG really, really starts to kick in.
Thank you, Andy. So, also wanted to understand at what stage is a right stage to approach a VC, and how could a designer or a product person could tune their product or tune their pitch in such way that they could attract VCs.
I mean, so the first thing to understand is that VCs work at different stages. I've already sort of mentioned some of the buzzwords and names before, but CCAP operate at the pre-seed and the seed stage. Pre-seed is usually the very, very first check you get, or at least the very first institutional check. Like, you might have had some angel investing, you might have been given some money from friends and family, but the first time you go out and raise a large amount of money, maybe £500,000 or more, you're usually having to go to a professional VC fund. And so those are the early stages. You then get kind of Series A and Series B, which is kind of larger VC companies that are taking products that are already kind of growing and sort of investing in them to really grow more. And then you get the kind of Series C, D, E later phases, which are kind of already massive companies that just need more money to scale, maybe internationally or whatever. And so in the early stages, it is still possible to raise funding with just a pitch deck. Um, it's harder, but if you've got a good idea, if you have a good team that the VC can really understand why this is the team will solve that idea, then you're in with a chance. Sadly, that often means that the people that are invested in just with a pitch deck are people that have already got quite a lot of caliber in the industry. Maybe they have run product at big companies before, maybe they're second time founders, maybe they're doing something in AI and they used to work at DeepMind. If you have this sort of CV, if you have this sort of resume that indicates why you would be the best people to bring that to market, then you can still raise just on a pitch deck. But it's increasingly common that you need a little bit more. So you might need a pitch deck and a working prototype. Or you might need a pitch deck, a working prototype, and 5 or 10 sort of beta users. Or maybe you need a pitch deck, a working prototype, and some paying customers. The reality is that the more you can de-risk the problem or the product in the eyes of your VCs, the more likelihood it will be that they'll be interested in. You know, if you can bootstrap, quickly, but if you can bootstrap to 500,000 or £1 million in revenue and maybe even skip over seed, go straight to Series A, then that's even better. But that's very rare. Most people need that early funding to get somewhere. And so I think go as far as you possibly can, as quickly and efficiently as you possibly can with the resources you have. And when you are getting confident that you're on the right track and you can communicate that confidence to potential investors, they go to investors and ask for money.
That's wonderful, Andy. Thank you so much. So, as AI is daily enabling more and more product makers, so how do you see the future of product building with rise of AI tools?
Um, I honestly don't know. I mean, I think because I think there's two maybe vaguely related or maybe unrelated questions in there. So I think your question or your assertion is that the AI changes the ability for people to create things. I think that's really true. I think if you imagine what the web was like in the 90s, at the real early kind of dot-com boom, in order to build a startup, you needed to go and buy rack space in a server. You might have to spend £200,000 just having a web server before you could even start building. Now you've got Elastic Cloud, you've got Amazon Web Services, and you can spool something up immediately. I think that AI is a little bit like that. I think that at the moment, there's still a lot of building you need to do. Although a lot of that is sold with libraries and sort of other tools that can allow people to deliver their tech stack really quickly. But I think that AI will be an accelerator. I think AI will bring the time to build down, at least the time to prototype down. And with that, there's a good thing and a bad thing. The good thing is that now will allow more people to become entrepreneurs because the barrier to entry becomes lower. The bad thing is more people can become entrepreneurs because the barrier to entry is lower. That means that we will see more bad ideas as well as maybe more good ideas. And so that means that for the VC, we'll get more and more pitches. We'll have to kind of, struggle to figure out which are the good ideas, et cetera, et cetera. So that could be a challenge. Um, but I think the other side of the question, which wasn't really sort of stated, but I think is implied, is that I do think we are going through a new platform revolution. I think if you built websites in the early noughties, you had 10 years to build e-commerce platforms and what have you. And then mobile came along. And mobile exploded the opportunity space more. Rather than this being a geeky thing you use on your website at home, you take the internet in your pocket. And so it created the whole app ecosystem. It allowed many, many more new products to exist and allowed a lot of products to be reinvented for a mobile kind of use case. Um, and I think we're going through a similar transformation with AI. I think AI will be like the mobile revolution. There will be a whole bunch of products that couldn't have been built that can now be built. And so this is what I'm seeing at the moment. A lot of the investing is investing in new capabilities that were difficult or impossible before, but have now been made possible. And so I think, yeah, we're going to see a massive change in software equivalent to the move from desktop to mobile.
Thank you so much, Andy, for sharing all these wonderful insights with us. So, could you please share with us how does your day look like as a VC?
I mean, my day is very spotty. So I work from home, like most people these days. A lot of people I work remotely, and I'm hopping on calls. So as a VC, I have maybe a dozen founders that I look after. We call them portfolio companies. I've got a dozen portfolio companies to look after, and I will have regular catch-up calls with them every couple of weeks to see how they're getting on and help them solve any problems. Every now and again, one of the founders will reach out to me and say, "Actually, Andy, I've got a bit of a challenge here. Can we go on a deep dive?" And so this might be something that is planned a week in advance. It might be something that someone just emails me straight away and say, "Andy, I need your help with something. Can I grab your time?" And so, yeah, lots and lots of calls. And then maybe every week I'll sit on a pitch. So people will be coming for funding, and I was sitting on a pitch yesterday afternoon. A couple of really, really sort of great founders had a really interesting idea in the AI space, and they were walking us through it. This is what we're doing. This is how we're going to approach it. This is our size of our market. These are the people who are going to be using the product. Yada yada yada. And then obviously we get to ask some questions. Oh, that's really interesting. But what about X? What about Y? Have you thought about Z? And then we all gather together and we, chat about, oh, do we think this is a good product? Can we see it going big? Yada, yada, yada. And then make a decision as to whether we want to invest or not. And so, I'd say about 20% of my time is focused on pre-investment deals and deal flow and assessing startups. But the majority of it, 80%, is post-investment, supporting the companies that we've invested in with all kinds of challenges that you face as a founder.
Thank you so much, Andy. So before we conclude, wanted to know your three favorite books and people who inspired you the most in this space.
Wow. Okay. Well, I mean, three favorite books in any genre might be a bit of a challenge, but three favorite books. Let's say three favorite books in the startup space. I think. Well, I would like to say the Growth Equation, but that's probably cheating. But a book that I often recommend to founders is called "Obviously Awesome" by April Dunford. The book is all about positioning. It's all about helping founders learn how to communicate what their product does in a way that lands with their customers. I've got a couple of chapters in the book all around this concept of like positioning and language market fit. And I recommend Obviously Awesome as a deep dive for people that want to get really into that, because people aren't going to come and use your product unless they understand what it does. And I think a lot of the time founders are really bad at describing what their product does because it's all in their head and they think it's obvious. And when they think it's obvious, they get frustrated when their slightly jumbled, garbled business speak doesn't immediately land. And so this is a big part of the marketing. This is a big part of like getting the motivation across, is making sure that people really understand what it is you do, who you're for, what problem you solved, and why they should care. So Obviously Awesome is a really good book. Um, there is another great book that I always recommend to founders, which is The Mum Test. Um, this is really a design research book, but it's not aimed at design, it's aimed at founders. A lot of founders are told that they need to go out and talk to customers, but they're pretty bad at talking to customers. Um, they often are trying not to kind of understand what customers need, but they're trying to validate their idea. They're trying to sell their idea to customers. And so I think the Mum Test is a really, really good book for doing that. And then the last book I will recommend, which I'm just going to look up, um, is a book called The High Growth Handbook by Elad Gil. I think this book is really the best kind of partner to the growth equation. So Elad's book is all about what you need to do as a founder and a manager to your company if you have growth. So the users are coming in. Um, how do you scale your business? How do you scale your team? How do you put the right people in the right seats? How do you get funding? Like all of these things that are the operational elements of running a startup. I think it's a brilliant book. The problem is the high growth handbook isn't helpful if you don't have high growth. And so the purpose of my book is to give you that growth, because that growth, growth solves a lot of problems, but it gives you a lot more problems. If you've got to hire 10 people, 20 people, if you've got to put processes in place, you need to fix that. And so the high growth handbook is really good with that. My book, like I say, is how you get that growth in the first place.
Thank you so much, Andy, for sharing these wonderful recommendations with us. And we are looking forward to host you again in our upcoming episodes. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. And yeah, I look forward to speaking to you soon.